Chapter 1. A Fateful Encounter in the Bathroom. Nathan Wanala pushed open the bathroom door, one hand scrolling quickly across his phone screen, his mind still occupied with thoughts of the important meeting the next morning. A long day filled with numbers and contracts had drained him, and now all he wanted was to stand under the hot water, letting the steam wash away the lingering tension in his body. But the moment the door swung open, he froze. The air inside was thick with steam, clinging to the mirror's surface in misty streaks. Water continued to drip from the shower head, splashing against the cold marble floor. And right in the middle of the dense fog, a mysterious figure emerged. Nathan blinked, his heartbeat faltering for a split second. A woman. She spun around at the sound of the door, her bright blue eyes widening in shock, her breath hitching as if suddenly cut off. Time stood still. Caroline. She stood there, wet hair cascading over her bare shoulders, droplets of water trailing lazily down her porcelain-like skin. A hastily wrapped towel clung to her body, too thin to fully obscure the curves that were accentuated by the dim golden light. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Neither spoke, neither moved. Her gaze flickered, not just with embarrassment, but with hatred. A sharp, searing hatred that sliced through the air between them, leaving Nathan slightly unsettled. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She didn't panic. She just stood there frozen, her sharp eyes full of wariness. A strange feeling stirred within Nathan. He had encountered plenty of women in similar situations. Most of them would either blush furiously or feign modesty while secretly attempting to entice him. But Caroline was different. She despised him, and she made no effort to hide it. Damn it. What are you doing here? Her voice was hoarse from shock, yet remarkably steady. Nathan raised an eyebrow, quickly regaining his usual composure, even as something unexplainable stirred inside him. I should be the one asking you that, he replied, his voice deep and husky. She gripped the towel tighter around her body, her lips pressed into a firm line. Nathan could see her chest rising and falling rapidly, but she held her ground, stepping back to put distance between them. She was nothing like the other house staff in this mansion, those who always bowed their heads in fear, too timid to meet his gaze. Nathan should have looked away. He should have walked out immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he stood still, his eyes trailing over her face. Those fiery blue eyes, that elegantly sculpted nose, and the soft lips she was biting down on to suppress her emotions. A breathtakingly beautiful woman, but it wasn't just that. She was proud, and she wasn't afraid of him. What the hell was happening? Caroline took a deep breath, finally breaking the silence. The staff's bathroom is out of water. Her voice was still slightly unsteady, but her determination remained. I didn't think anyone was here, so I used this one. Nathan blinked, his brows drawing together slightly. She thought no one was here, so she hadn't done this on purpose. A strange thought flickered through his mind. He should have been angry that someone had trespassed into his private bathroom, but instead, his curiosity deepened. Caroline met his gaze head-on, as if daring him to challenge her. A heavy silence stretched between them. She quickly stepped past him, eager to escape this bizarre situation as soon as possible. But just as she brushed by, a firm hand wrapped around her wrist. She froze. The warmth of Nathan's palm seeped into her skin. He didn't understand himself. Why had he stopped her? His voice was raspier than he expected, but he blinked, regaining clarity. This is my room. Caroline yanked her wrist free, her eyes turning icy as she stared straight at him. Is that so? Her voice was eerily calm, but her gaze burned. Then I apologize, Mr. Wanala. She emphasized the last two words with biting sarcasm before spinning on her heel and walking away without a backward glance. The bathroom door slammed shut behind her. Nathan stood there enveloped in the lingering steam, his heart still racing for reasons he couldn't quite understand. Her scent still lingered in the air, a soft trace of vanilla mixed with something wilder. He felt unsettled, a little confused, a little intrigued. But more than anything, he couldn't get her out of his mind, and that was more dangerous than anything else. Welcome to Soul Stories, Punjay. Life can be overwhelming, But here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 2. Nathan's Obsession, the More He Wants to Conquer. Nathan Wanala couldn't stop thinking about her. Since that fateful night in the bathroom, Caroline's image had haunted him in ways he couldn't explain. During the day, while sitting in high-rise office meetings, he would suddenly recall her delicate face amid the swirling steam, those sharp blue eyes betraying a flicker of unease. At night, lying in bed, instead of thinking about work or the many women who had come and gone in his life, he found himself remembering the way her lips pressed together in defiant pride, her unwavering gaze pushing him away. This wasn't normal. Nathan had never been fixated on a woman before. He could have anyone he wanted, easily, but with Caroline, it felt as if she was the one controlling him, and that was something he couldn't tolerate. She avoided him. She rejected every bit of attention he gave her, and that only made him want to conquer her more. Nathan had always believed that money could buy anything. Women had always sought his favor, seizing every opportunity to get his attention, willing to do anything for a place in his life. A lavish dinner, a brand new sports car, a piece of exquisite jewelry. With the slightest gesture from him, they would come running, like moths drawn to a flame. But Caroline, she didn't care. He invited her to dinner. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" he asked, his voice laced with intrigue. Caroline looked up, her expression eerily calm. "Sorry, sir, but I have other things to do." Nathan narrowed his eyes. What could be more important than dinner with me? Doing my job as a housekeeper? She gave a small, polite smile before turning away. He offered her a raise. He knew she needed money. She had a younger brother to take care of, hospital bills for her father. Yet when he proposed doubling her salary, she simply declined without hesitation. "I don't need it. My current salary is enough to cover my expenses. I don't want to owe you anything." Nathan couldn't believe his ears. Who refuses money from him? He tried gifting her something expensive. One day he left a small box on his office desk, a pair of exquisite diamond earrings, custom made just for her. Caroline walked in, picked it up, examined it for a long moment. Then she calmly closed the box and placed it right back where she found it. No questions, no hesitation, no sign of desire. Nathan had never met anyone like her. Everything he had, money, power, charm, was useless against her. She wasn't swayed, she wasn't tempted, and it drove him insane. The harder she was to get, the more he wanted to conquer. Nathan Wanala had never been rejected by a woman before. He was used to being in control. But with Caroline, everything was turned upside down. She refused every attempt he made to get closer. She avoided his gaze. She made sure never to cross paths with him. She treated him as if he were just another stranger in the mansion. But what she didn't realize was that it only made him more determined. Nathan wasn't one to give up. If money couldn't buy her, if power couldn't shake her, then he would find another way to make sure she couldn't ignore him. Because now, more than ever, he didn't just want to conquer her. He wanted her heart. He started appearing in front of her on purpose. Before, he had never paid much attention to the household staff. But ever since Caroline arrived, everything had changed. He started staying home more often, appearing in places she was bound to be. Every day he found a way to accidentally cross paths with her, just to see her a little longer, to exchange even the shortest conversation. That day, Caroline was cleaning the library. She stood on a ladder, reaching up to dust the highest bookshelves, her slender frame focused entirely on her task. Nathan passed by, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her. After a moment, he decided to speak. "I'm on my way to the kitchen," he said casually, his deep voice effortlessly smooth. Caroline paused slightly but didn't turn around immediately. She finished wiping another shelf before responding, her voice light. "Really?" Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Obviously." This time, Caroline slowly turned, her deep blue eyes locking onto his. Sir, the kitchen is in the opposite direction. Nathan froze for a second. Clearing his throat, he turned and walked in the right direction, as if that had been his plan all along. Admiring the garden, but only looking in one direction. The sky was clear that day, sunlight gently filtering through the canopy of leaves. Caroline was watering the flower beds, her hair swaying lightly with the breeze. Nathan stepped outside, a cup of coffee in hand, pretending to enjoy the fresh air. He stood in a corner, eyes fixed on her. Minutes passed, yet Caroline remained focused on her task. Then suddenly she turned around, her gaze meeting his. Caroline tilted her head slightly, a faint smile appearing on her lips. You like this garden? Nathan nodded immediately. Very much. Caroline glanced around. Which plant is your favorite? Nathan froze. Plants. They all looked the same. In the end, he pointed randomly at a nearby bush. This one? Caroline followed his gaze. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then she turned back to him, her smile widening. That's a weed. Nathan stiffened. He looked down at the poor little plant struggling to grow from the soil. Then, maintaining as much composure as possible, he took a slow sip of his coffee and nodded thoughtfully. Weeds have their own unique beauty. But she said nothing more. She simply returned to her work, leaving Nathan standing there, embarrassed by his own blunder. Yet that didn't discourage him. In fact, he considered it progress. Rather than facing her cold indifference, having his clumsy coincidences exposed was far better. He still had a chance, and he would find more ways to get close to her. Nathan came up with new excuses to call her to his room. His coffee was still full, still warm, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he wanted to see Caroline. He pressed the intercom button, his deep voice carrying undeniable authority. Caroline, bring me a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, she walked in. No emotion, no complaints, no visible reaction. She simply placed the cup on his desk with practiced professionalism, as if he were just another task on her checklist. Then, without so much as a glance, she turned to leave. Nathan frowned slightly. Did she really not realize his request was just an excuse? He cleared his throat, lifting the cup, intentionally holding her gaze a little longer. Aren't you curious why I asked for another coffee when the old one is still untouched? Caroline paused, turning her head slightly to look at him. Then her eyes flickered to the previous cup sitting on his desk. Then back to him. 1 second. 2 seconds. Finally, she simply replied, no, and walked out of the room. Nathan stood frozen. He had never been so blatantly ignored before. But rather than deterring him, it only fueled his desire to conquer her even more. A different kind of battle. On another day, Nathan shuffled a few stacks of documents on his desk, deliberately creating a bit of chaos. Then he called Caroline in. She entered, her sharp gaze waiting for him to speak. My files are a mess. Organize them. Caroline looked down at his desk. She picked up a folder, flipping through its pages slowly. Everything was already perfectly categorized. Neat, organized, flawless. There wasn't a single sign of the mess he had just claimed. She lifted her eyes, calm yet piercing. A mess? Nathan maintained his serious expression. A complete mess. Caroline exhaled quietly, placing the folder back down. Then she simply said, then I'll organize it. Nathan smirked slightly. He could sense the irritation hidden in her precise, controlled movements. But she still did it. Professional, composed, giving him no opening to stretch the conversation longer than necessary. 30 minutes later, she gave him a curt nod. Done, sir. Then she turned and left before he could say another word. Nathan sat there watching her retreating figure, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had just lost a round. But that was fine. She could keep her distance, but Nathan wouldn't give up. Nathan knew she was trying to push him away. She kept her distance, maintaining an impeccable coldness. But he lived by one rule: the harder it was, the more he wanted it. And Caroline, she was the most intriguing challenge of his life. That night, after a grueling business meeting, Nathan returned home late, the scent of whiskey still lingering on him. He wasn't actually drunk, but he wanted to see What would she do if he lost control? He staggered into the living room, where Caroline was cleaning the fireplace. Caroline! His voice was lower, rougher than usual, laced with a hint of feigned intoxication. She looked up, her icy blue eyes steady. She didn't panic. She didn't rush over to steady him like other women would. Nathan took a slow step forward, his gaze locked onto hers, his movements slightly unsteady, deliberately so, as if seeking an anchor. Caroline didn't step back, but she also didn't rush to help him. Nathan let out a quiet chuckle. She was too smart to fall for it, and yet after a few seconds, she still moved toward him. Not because she was drawn to him, but because she was a good person. She reached for his arm lightly but kept enough distance that he had no chance to take advantage of the moment. "You need to rest, Mr. Wanala." Her voice was gentle but firm. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. She really wasn't tempted. Unlike other women who would have used this as an opportunity to get closer to him, to leave an impression on him, Caroline stood her ground. She never let him touch her, and that only made him want her more. Caroline couldn't be bought with money. She wasn't swayed by his charm. She wasn't weak, nor was she ambitious. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. Nathan was losing control. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing an emotion he had never felt before. He wanted her, but not in the way he had ever wanted anyone else. He wanted her to come to him willingly, not for money, not for power, but for him, and that was what truly terrified him. Chapter 3. Nathan discovers the truth. The sky was overcast that day, weak rays of sunlight barely filtering through the large office window of Nathan Wanala. It was just another ordinary day, or at least that's what he had thought. Sitting at his desk, he absent-mindedly skimmed through the mansion's employee records, a casual habit, something he had never truly paid much attention to. But then his eyes stopped on a name, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Caroline Smith. He blinked, but the name remained. An uneasy feeling stirred within him, an inexplicable sense of foreboding he couldn't immediately rationalize. He pulled out her file, flipping through the pages slowly, as if his mind had already anticipated something it wasn't quite ready to accept. And then his gaze landed on a single line. Father's name, William Smith. A violent jolt shot through him. His fingers clenched around the edge of the folder, knuckles turning white. His heartbeat thundered, so loud it echoed in his chest. Number up? It couldn't be. William Smith. That name. It was nothing more than a forgotten fragment of the past. Something he had never spared a second thought. But now it was back, like a ghost rising from the shadows, dragging with it a terrifying truth he could no longer escape. 3 years ago, Wanala Corporation executed one of the most ruthless takeovers in history. Smith Enterprises, a promising family-run company, was driven to the brink of collapse overnight. Nathan had no involvement in the deal. He had only heard about it in passing, casual conversations between his father, Alexander Wanala, and his business associates. They mocked William Smith's incompetence. They spoke of how he had been destroyed, how he had lost everything, his family, his reputation, his fortune. Nathan hadn't cared. To him, it was just another victory in an endless string of corporate battles his family had won. But now, he couldn't breathe. Because Caroline, the one woman he wanted to conquer, was the daughter of that very man. She wasn't just any woman, she was a victim. And whether directly or indirectly, he was part of the force that had ruined her life. For the first time in his life, Nathan felt guilt. A suffocating weight pressed against his chest. His fingers clenched around the file, crumpling the edges of the paper. The pieces of the puzzle in his mind began to fall into place. He remembered the ice in Caroline's eyes whenever she looked at him, her distant demeanor, her unshakable pride, the way she rejected everything he offered her, money, attention, even a simple dinner. She knew. She had known who he was from the very beginning, and she despised him. Nathan shot up from his chair, his sharp gaze clouded with turmoil. This was no longer a game. This was no longer just desire. Caroline would never accept him, because he carried the name Wanala, the name that had shattered her life, that had torn her family apart, that had forced her to abandon her dreams and work as a maid in the very home of her enemy. A foreign feeling surged through Nathan's chest, one he had never experienced before. It wasn't the hunger of wanting a woman, it was a deeper fear, the fear that she would never forgive him. Nathan took a deep breath, but it did nothing to calm him. He had always believed he could have any woman he wanted, but this time, he didn't know what to do, not because she challenged him, not because she rejected him, but because she was Caroline. Too different, too strong, too proud. She wasn't a fleeting indulgence. She was a storm that could tear through everything inside him. And now, staring at the truth, a terrifying question settled in his mind. Could she ever forgive him? Could he hold on to her when their past was drenched in cruelty? His grip tightened on the file as he shut his eyes. A sense of helplessness seeped into every inch of his being. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Nathan Wanala feared he had already lost Caroline, before he had even had her. Chapter 4. The Tense Confrontation. Nathan waited for Caroline in the mansion's library. Outside, the sky was pitch black. The flickering light from the fireplace cast long, wavering shadows across the room, draping it in a thick, suffocating tension. He leaned against his desk, gripping a thin file, her file so tightly that the edges crumpled in his grasp. He had read that name over and over again today, and now the person bearing that name was about to walk into this room. A part of him wanted to pretend he didn't know, but he couldn't. The door creaked open. Caroline stepped in, her long hair neatly tied back, her navy blue uniform as crisp and perfect as ever. There was no sign that she had any idea what was coming. "You called for me?" Her voice was calm as always. Nathan stared at her, his chest tightening. She stood there completely unaware that he had uncovered her secret. The moment she stepped further inside, Nathan reached out and slammed the door shut behind her. She froze. He didn't give her a chance to react. His voice was low, controlled. "You're Caroline Smith." Silence, a deadly pause stretched between them. Nathan could see her breathing slow, but then she lifted her head, her gaze unwavering. "So, you investigated me." Her voice didn't waver in the slightest. Nathan narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "You knew from the start, didn't you?" He took a step closer, his voice sharper now. "Did you come here to get revenge on me?" His question cut through the space between them like a blade. Caroline stilled. Then suddenly she let out a laugh, a bitter, hollow laugh. "Revenge?" she repeated, arching an eyebrow, her voice razor sharp. "And what exactly could a housekeeper do to a billionaire like you?" Nathan stiffened. She didn't deny it, but she didn't falter either. Caroline took a step forward, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "You think I deliberately got close to you?" she asked, her voice tightening, but never breaking. Nathan didn't respond, because that was exactly what he had assumed. Caroline inhaled deeply before speaking again, each word cutting through him like a knife. "I don't have time for stupid revenge schemes. I have a younger brother to care for, a father to support. I took this job because I needed money, not because I wanted to be here." The air between them grew suffocating. Her words sliced through him with brutal precision. Nathan clenched his fists. His pride had been shattered. He had always believed he could have anything he wanted. He had power, wealth, absolute control. But with Caroline, he had nothing. She didn't care about him, not because he was Nathan Wanala, not because he was a billionaire, but because his family had destroyed hers. Nathan took a deep breath, his hands curling into tight fists at his sides. She hated him, and now he finally understood why. Silence loomed between them. Caroline watched him, waiting for a response. Nathan closed his eyes, struggling to contain the storm raging inside him. He couldn't change the past. But he knew one thing. He had to change the future. When he opened his eyes, his gaze no longer held the desire to simply conquer her. It held determination. No matter what it took, he wouldn't let her walk away from him. Chapter 5. A Chance Encounter. She was truly unlike anyone else. That afternoon, Nathan had just finished a long meeting and was on his way back to the mansion, his mind preoccupied with countless critical decisions about the company's restructuring. But then, something on the side of the road made him slam on the brakes. Up ahead, just off the bustling street, Caroline was kneeling down, handing out meals to the homeless. Nathan sat motionless in his car, his eyes locked onto her. She wore a simple sweater, her hair neatly tied back, yet her face held a gentle smile as she handed a steaming meal to an elderly man curled up in the corner of the sidewalk. She didn't just give food, she sat down with them. She talked to them. She listened to them. Her eyes held warmth, not pity but genuine kindness. Something he had never seen before. Nathan had never met anyone like her, a woman who had lost everything. A woman still struggling to take care of her younger brother, to support her father, to simply survive, yet she still gave. He had always assumed that those who had suffered loss would become bitter, self-serving, guarded. But Caroline wasn't like that. She wasn't rich. She wasn't privileged. Yet she gave more than anyone he had ever known. A tightness gripped Nathan's chest. He had seen too many people who had everything, yet never knew how to give. And her, she had nothing. But she gave more than anyone else. His feelings for her changed forever. Nathan had never stopped being drawn to her. But in this moment, something inside him shifted. It was no longer just the desire of a man wanting to conquer a woman. It was respect. It was admiration. It was something deeper than anything he had ever understood about love. For the first time, Nathan Wanala felt small before Caroline. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was a challenge, but because she had the purest heart he had ever known. And in that moment, he realized he would do whatever it took to be a man worthy of her. Chapter 6. The effort to right his wrong. Nathan couldn't ignore it anymore. He began digging into the Smith Corporation's downfall. He spent the entire night locked in his office. Before him, his computer screen was filled with old financial reports, merger contracts, and newspaper articles from 3 years ago about the Smith Corporation's bankruptcy. He read each line slowly. Each word felt like a knife stabbing into his pride. And then he saw the truth. His father hadn't just won, he had cheated. Alexander Wanala wasn't just a brilliant businessman who had outplayed a competitor. He had rigged the game. He had played dirty. The Smith Corporation could have been saved, if not for the invisible pressure exerted by secret partners his father had manipulated behind the scenes. William Smith hadn't lost because he was weak. He had been pushed off a cliff, torn apart by a system that was never meant to be fair. Nathan felt sick, not just because of what his father had done, but because of himself, because he had once never cared about the consequences of that deal, because he had been a part of this ruthless machine. Nathan had never felt so powerless. He leaned back in his chair, burying his face in his hands. He couldn't begin to imagine the pain Caroline had endured. Losing everything, being pushed to the brink of ruin, having to abandon her dreams, her privileged life, just to become a maid, scraping together every penny to support her younger brother and pay for her father's hospital bills. And now she was surviving in the very house of the people who had destroyed her family. Nathan felt his pride shatter. Every effort he had made, every attempt to win her over, every test he had put her through, felt meaningless now. She could never love him. She could never look at him without remembering what his family had done. But he could still do something. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to fix it. Nathan knew nothing in this world could erase the damage his father had done, but he would still try. He picked up his phone and dialed one of his most trusted associates, a top financial lawyer. "I need you to reinvestigate the Smith Corporation acquisition. Look for any legal loopholes for an appeal or possible restitution." "Nathan, that deal was closed 3 years ago. Why are you suddenly—" "Just do it." His voice left no room for argument. Then he set up an anonymous financial fund, a fund that would secretly help Caroline's family, her brother, her father's hospital bills, if possible, even her father himself, to give them a chance to stand on their feet again. But Caroline could never know, because if she did, she would refuse it. She didn't need his pity, but this wasn't pity. This was guilt. This was atonement. Because Nathan couldn't live with himself, knowing that the only woman he wanted by his side was the same woman whose life his family had destroyed. Chapter 8. A Journey Together, a True Connection. Nathan couldn't shake the image of Caroline kneeling down, handing out meals to the homeless, her eyes filled with a warmth and sincerity he had never seen in anyone else. That image stayed with him for days, and then one afternoon, as Caroline busied herself in the kitchen preparing dinner, he walked in. "I want to join you." She looked up, slightly surprised. "What?" Nathan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Your charity work," he said slowly, each word laced with conviction. "I want to be a part of it." Caroline blinked, studying him for a long moment. He wasn't joking. There was no arrogance, no amusement, just genuine sincerity, something she had never seen in him before. "I'm visiting an orphanage this weekend," she finally said, her tone calm. "Are you sure you want to come?" Nathan smirked slightly, but there was no self-satisfaction in his expression. Absolutely sure. A world he had never known. That weekend, Nathan Wanala, a man who had always surrounded himself with wealth and power, stepped into a world completely foreign to him, an orphanage. The moment they walked in, the children swarmed Caroline. They squealed with joy, hugging her, chattering excitedly about everything that had happened during the week. Nathan stood still for a moment, watching the scene unfold. It was overwhelming. She belonged here. Not in a world of luxury, not in a battlefield of corporate power plays, but in a place where love was given freely. Caroline turned back and noticed him still standing there. She let out a soft laugh. "Don't tell me you're afraid of kids?" Nathan raised an eyebrow and took a step forward. "I've just never been around this many before." She shook her head and shoved a box of crayons into his hand. "Well then, here's your chance." The moment everything changed. That afternoon, for the first time in his life, Nathan sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children, listening to their stories. One kid proudly showed him a drawing. Another asked if he was a superhero because he looked like Iron Man. From a distance, Caroline watched him. A strange emotion settled in her chest. She had never imagined she would see Nathan Wanala, a billionaire so used to his world of privilege, laughing and playing among a group of orphan children. But what surprised her even more was that he wasn't faking it. He wasn't doing this to impress her. He was actually trying. A conversation that meant more than words. When the children finally ran off to play, the two of them sat together on a bench under the shade of a tree. For the first time, they talked without walls between them. About childhood, about loss, about what truly mattered in life. Nathan spoke about his mother, a woman who had once been gentle, but had been hardened by the ruthless world around her. Caroline spoke about her father, a man who had once been strong, but had been crushed under the weight of injustice. For the first time, they truly understood each other. Not as a billionaire and a maid, not as a man who had everything and a woman who had lost it all, but as two people, learning how to heal their own wounds. Nathan turned to Caroline, watching as the golden afternoon light illuminated her face, making her blue eyes shine. And in that moment, he knew. He had found something he had never had before, someone who made him want to be a better man. Chapter 9. Love Between Two Worlds. Caroline no longer understood Nathan Wanala. He was no longer the cold, arrogant man she once knew. He no longer tried to flirt with her in that overbearing way. Gone were the teasing smirks, the provocative glances, the invitations she always turned down. Instead, he had changed. She started noticing strange things. The debts she had been struggling to pay for over a year were mysteriously disappearing. Her younger brother Ethan's tuition was suddenly fully covered. Her father's doctor reduced hospital fees, saying an anonymous organization had stepped in to help. She knew. She didn't need to ask. She already knew who was behind this. But what she didn't understand was why. A night of pouring rain. That night, the rain came down in heavy sheets. Caroline was cleaning the dining room, the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windows filling the quiet space, the wind howling softly outside. She had just finished wiping down the long table, her fingers tightening around the damp cloth. This job had become second nature to her, a repetitive cycle that never changed. Then footsteps. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Nathan. He stood there silent, The warm glow of the overhead lights cast sharp angles on his face, his dark eyes fixed on her, as if there were 1,000 things he wanted to say but couldn't. Caroline frowned, gripping the cloth in her hands. "Mr. Wanala, I haven't finished my work yet." Her voice was cold, distant, but Nathan didn't care about that. Slowly, he held out an envelope. Caroline glanced at it briefly, but instead of taking it, she crossed her arms. "If this is another check, I suggest you save yourself the trouble." She lifted her chin, her icy blue eyes colder than the rain outside. Nathan didn't withdraw his hand. "It's not money," he said, his deep voice steady. Caroline's brows furrowed, suspicion flashing in her gaze. After a moment, she reached out and took the envelope. She opened it. Inside, there was no money. It was a job offer. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. Caroline's body tensed. The words on the paper were clear. Job offer, Wanala Community Development Fund. She looked up, disbelief in her eyes. Nathan had walked away from his father's empire. He had created something new, a foundation dedicated to charitable projects, small business support, and education for underprivileged children. And now he was offering her a place in it. "You're trying to atone, aren't you?" Her voice wasn't loud, it didn't waver, but the bitterness in it was enough to cut through the air between them. Nathan held her gaze for a long time. The Nathan she once knew would have smirked, thrown back a teasing remark. But the man standing before her did none of that. He simply stood there, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "I can't change the past," he said slowly, his voice low and heavy with an unspoken weight. "But I can change the future." A choice that wasn't easy. Caroline felt like something was clenching around her chest. She wanted to be angry, wanted to throw the envelope back at him, wanted to scream that nothing could erase what his father had done to her family. But she couldn't, because this wasn't a check meant to buy her silence. This was an opportunity to work for what she earned, not to be pitied, an opportunity to break free from the life of a maid, to start fresh. She bit her lip, staring at him for a long moment. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan took a deep breath. "Because you deserve better than this." Caroline clenched her jaw, her chest tightening. She wanted to say no, but deep down she knew this was no longer just about her. She had a younger brother to think about, a future to fight for, and most importantly, this job mattered. She could make a difference. She could help others, just as she had always wanted. And maybe it was time to stop running. Caroline took a slow, deep breath, gripping the letter tightly. Then, with eyes that were no longer cold, she gave a small nod. "I'll think about it." Nathan smiled softly. This wasn't a victory, but it was a beginning. Caroline was no longer sure of anything. She had convinced herself that she would always hate him, but now she wasn't sure she could. Nathan had never asked for her forgiveness. He had never begged for redemption. He had simply stayed, quietly, steadily, changing, not for himself, but for her. And that made her heart falter. She looked at him now, standing beneath the dim glow of the lights, his hair still damp from the rain, his eyes holding nothing but raw sincerity. She wanted to hate him, but she couldn't, because her heart had already started to lean toward him. Chapter 10. Reform, Nathan's fight to make things right. Nathan never thought he would one day stand against the very system that had created him. But now he had no choice. He couldn't turn his back on the truth. He couldn't ignore the way his father had built the Wanala empire, on ruthless acquisitions, unethical deals, and power plays that crushed anyone who stood in the way. That was how his father did business, but it wouldn't be how he did. Nathan stood at the tallest window of Wanala Corporation's headquarters, looking down at the city below. 3 years ago, this very place had destroyed Caroline's family. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the way this company operated, and that change started now. The next morning, Nathan summoned the company's executive board. The vast conference room where so many ruthless deals had been made now echoed with his firm, unwavering voice. "Starting today, Wanala Corporation will take a new direction." Stunned silence. Wealthy shareholders, powerful executives. Not one of them had expected this decision. Nathan cut off every unethical deal. He implemented a transparent system to ensure that all of Wanala's transactions were built on fair competition. He ordered a full review of past acquisitions, searching for ways to compensate the businesses that had been crushed under his father's regime. He established a fund to support small businesses, ensuring they wouldn't be suffocated by financial giants like Wanala had once been. Executives who had built their careers on ruthless business tactics resisted. High-ranking directors shook their heads, disbelief in their eyes. "Nathan, are you serious? This will kill our competitive edge." "Your father would never allow this. The business world has no place for kindness." But Nathan didn't care, because he had seen what happens when greed goes unchecked. He had seen what happened to Caroline's family, and he would never let it happen again. Reforming a corporation was never going to be easy. Nathan faced relentless pressure from shareholders. The media started questioning his decisions. His father's loyalists within the company actively fought against him. But Nathan didn't back down. Every time exhaustion crept in, every time he questioned whether it was worth it, he thought of Caroline. He thought of the pain in her blue eyes the day he confronted her in the library. He thought of how she lost everything, all because of one ruthless business decision made by his father. He wasn't doing this just for her, but she had taught him what was right, and because of that, he couldn't stop. The following month, his reforms took effect. Small businesses that had once been crushed by Wanala Corporation were given the support they needed to rise again. Transparency, fairness, sustainability. That was the new foundation of Wanala Corporation. Nathan was ready to face anyone who tried to stand in his way. He didn't care about losing a few $1 billion, because he was building something worth more than money. He was rebuilding himself. He was finally doing the right thing. And for the first time in his life, Nathan Wanala felt proud of the man he was becoming. Chapter 11. The Return of Nathan's Father. Everything was going well, but Caroline felt uneasy. Nathan had changed too much. He was no longer the arrogant billionaire who controlled everything with money. He had helped her younger brother. He had erased her family's debts. He was trying to fix the damage his father had caused. But deep down, she knew this couldn't end so easily, and she was right, because a ghost from the past had returned. That evening, as Caroline was working in the library, the grand doors of the mansion swung open. A group of men in suits entered, their presence exuding power and intimidation. And leading them was Alexander Wanala, the man she had never met, but had hated her entire life. The man who had destroyed her family. Even at 60, his presence was commanding, his aura cold and ruthless, the kind of power that demanded both respect and fear. The moment he stepped inside, the air in the mansion froze. Caroline clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. Nathan stepped out of his office, his eyes darkening the second he saw his father. "Father!" His voice was icy. Alexander narrowed his eyes, then shifted his sharp gaze toward Caroline. He studied her, as if evaluating a mere commodity, and then he scoffed. "So it's true." Turning to Nathan, his voice was low but filled with disdain. "You really bowed down for the daughter of a failure?" Rage burned in Caroline's veins, but before she could react, Nathan took a step forward, positioning himself between her and his father. "Don't talk about her like that." His voice was frigid. Alexander smirked. "Did you really think I didn't know?" His tone sharpened. "Did you think I wouldn't find out that you've been secretly helping her family, erasing their debts, paying for tuition, setting up financial funds, rebuilding her father's company, reforming the corporation?" Caroline's eyes widened. She hadn't known Nathan had done so much. Alexander's voice hardened. "I built this empire with my own hands, and now you're destroying it, all for a woman?" Nathan's expression didn't waver. "I'm not destroying anything." His voice was calm but unyielding. "I'm fixing what you did wrong." "Fixing?" Alexander laughed coldly. "There is no room for weakness in this world. If her family had been strong enough, they wouldn't have been crushed by me." Caroline's fist tightened so hard that her nails dug into her skin. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him he was a monster. But before she could open her mouth, Nathan spoke first. "I don't care what you think." The room had never felt colder. Alexander Wanala sat in his throne-like chair, his sharp gaze piercing through the silence, like a judge delivering a verdict of betrayal. Nathan stood across from him, unyielding. The battle between two generations had reached its climax. Alexander tapped his fingers against the polished wood of his desk. Slow, deliberate, menacing. "You've gone too far, Nathan." His voice was low, filled with quiet authority. "I've been silent long enough, watching you. But this ends now." Nathan didn't flinch. He had known this moment would come. Alexander leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Stop what you're doing. Shut down that ridiculous charity fund. Cut ties with that girl immediately." That girl. The way he spoke about Caroline as if she were nothing sent a slow, simmering rage through Nathan's veins. His fists clenched. "And if I don't?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge of defiance. Alexander let out a cold laugh. "If you don't," his tone turned sharper, "then you are no longer the heir to Wanala Corporation." A deadly silence settled over the room. Nathan took a deep breath. He wasn't surprised. He had known his father would use this against him. Alexander Wanala believed that money was the ultimate power, but this time, he had miscalculated his own son. Nathan met his father's gaze, his voice calm, unwavering, and without fear. "If you think I would choose your fortune over Caroline, then you're wrong." For the first time in his entire life, Alexander blinked, his expression momentarily stunned. "What did you just say?" His voice was dangerously low. Nathan's jaw tightened, every word cutting the last remaining ties between them. "I'm leaving Wanala Corporation. I'm walking away from everything. I'll build from the ground up." A flicker of shock passed through Alexander's normally unreadable face. "You're giving up billions for a woman?" His voice rose with disbelief. Nathan let out a quiet chuckle, a small, knowing smile, calm, unshaken, defiant. "I don't need this family's fortune." He turned, his gaze finding Caroline. "I just need her." She stood frozen, as if the world had just collapsed beneath her feet. She couldn't believe it. Alexander inhaled sharply, his eyes darkening. "You will regret this," he said, his voice stone cold. "You can't rebuild from nothing." Nathan merely shrugged. "We'll see." He stepped closer to his father, his tone lowering. "But I have a warning for you." Alexander narrowed his eyes. Nathan smirked, but there was no amusement in it. "Stop. Stop your dirty business tactics, or you'll lose everything." For a brief second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Alexander's face, but he said nothing. He simply sat there watching as his son turned and walked away without a single glance back. Nathan stepped out of his father's empire, and for the first time, his steps had never felt stronger. He had just given up everything, but he knew this was the right choice because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just following power. He was following what he truly believed in. More than anything, Nathan was no longer alone. Caroline was there, waiting for him. She didn't say a word. She simply looked at him for a long moment. And then, for the first time, she smiled. Not the cold, distant smile she had once used to keep him away. A real one. Software, warm. Nathan didn't need wealth because he had something far greater. A love that was real. Nathan Wanala, born into luxury, a man once too arrogant to care for anyone, had just given up everything. For her. Caroline felt her heart tighten. This wasn't what she wanted. She had never wanted him to sacrifice everything for her, but now he had done it without hesitation. She looked into his eyes. Honest, strong, completely unregretful. Nathan truly didn't care about money or power. He only cared about her. And in that moment, Caroline finally understood. She had fallen in love with him. Chapter 11. A new beginning. Building something new for those who needed it most. After walking away from his father's empire, Nathan no longer cared about being a billionaire. He had seen too much of what greed could do. Now the only thing he wanted was to build something that truly made a difference. Using his personal fortune, Nathan founded a startup dedicated to community-driven projects. His company supported small businesses, invested in education for underprivileged children, and funded sustainable development initiatives. Everything was transparent, no backroom deals, no exploitation. Nathan was determined to do things right from the start, and when he asked Caroline to join him, she didn't hesitate. She didn't do it for him, she did it because this was what she believed in. From the very beginning, Caroline became his strategic advisor. She helped Nathan structure their charity projects correctly. She ensured funds went where they were supposed to. She oversaw education programs to ensure real impact. And every time Nathan saw her working tirelessly, her eyes lighting up when a project succeeded, he knew he had made the right choice, not just for himself, but because he wanted to walk this path with her. 1 year later, their company had made a powerful difference. Hundreds of underprivileged children were now on full scholarships. Families who had lost everything to corporate greed were given a second chance. Poor communities now had infrastructure, clean water, and renewable energy. Through it all, Caroline became the person Nathan trusted the most. They stood side by side. They built something together, and with each passing day, their bond grew deeper. Nathan was no longer a billionaire who thought he could own everything. Caroline was no longer a woman defined by hatred. They were two people rewriting their story. A story not just about love, but about hope, forgiveness, and rebuilding something beautiful from the ruins of the past. Chapter 16. Exposing the truth, the final battle. Nathan thought he had left his past behind, but his father's shadow hadn't disappeared. Just year after Nathan had walked away from Wanala Corporation and built his own company, a shocking scandal erupted. A large-scale investigation was launched into Wanala Corporation's illegal business practices. Money laundering, tax fraud, market manipulation, everything was being exposed. Nathan stood frozen, watching the news flash across the screen. And then, Alexander Wanala was arrested. Alongside him, several high-ranking board members were being investigated and faced prosecution. The empire that had once ruled the financial world was now crumbling before the eyes of the entire world. Nathan couldn't just stand by and watch. He had left. But he still carried the name Wanala, and if the company collapsed completely, thousands of employees would lose their jobs. Hundreds of families would suffer. He had to go back. For years, Nathan had fought against his father. Now, for the first time, he walked back into the boardroom of Wanala Corporation. But this time, he was no longer the arrogant heir of Alexander Wanala. He was a true leader, a man determined to rebuild from the ashes, to dismantle the corrupt empire his father had created and replace it with something just. Nathan dissolved the old leadership. He removed everyone involved in illegal transactions. He restructured the company, transforming it into a sustainable, transparent, and fair organization. And this time, he wasn't alone. Caroline wasn't just the woman he loved. She was the woman who had taught him what was right. And together, they weren't just rebuilding a company, they were rebuilding a legacy. A gray afternoon, Nathan and Caroline stepped through the heavy iron gates of the prison where Alexander Wanala was being held. For the first time in years, Nathan looked at his father, not with fear, not with anger, but with something else. Understanding, empathy. Alexander looked older. The powerful, cold-hearted businessman was gone. What remained was an aging man, hollowed out by the very world he had once controlled. A world without rules, a world that had finally turned against him. When Alexander's gaze fell upon Caroline, something unexpected flickered in his eyes. Regret. He inhaled deeply, as if struggling to find the words. And then slowly he spoke. "I owe you an apology, Caroline." Caroline lifted her head, her icy blue eyes colder than ever. For a moment, Nathan thought she wouldn't accept it. She had every right not to. But then, after a long silence, she gave a small nod. Not out of forgiveness, but because she refused to let hatred control her anymore. They had endured too much. Now it was time to move forward. After everything, after the storms had passed, after the battles had been fought and won, Nathan knew he couldn't wait any longer. One evening on the rooftop of his penthouse with the city lights shimmering beneath him, he knelt down. Caroline's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Once they had been enemies. Once they had belonged to two different worlds. But now, They had overcome everything together. Nathan looked up at her, his voice steady, filled with nothing but love. Caroline, you are the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me. I can't change the past, but I want to spend my life making you happy. Marry me. Caroline let out a small laugh, but tears had already begun rolling down her cheeks. She didn't need to think. Yes, not a grand, extravagant event. Not a wedding meant for the elite. Nathan and Caroline chose a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded only by the people who truly mattered. No designer gowns, no extravagant jewelry. Yet as Nathan looked at her, standing before him, she was more beautiful than anyone he had ever seen, because she was the woman he loved with every part of himself. And as he slipped the ring onto her finger, Nathan knew. This was the beginning of a new journey. No dark past, no mistakes to haunt them. Only a future, one they would build together, with love, trust, and the unshakable belief that they could change the world. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.